The observation deck of Station Valora 9 hummed with the usual cacophony of 100 different species conducting their business. But today, every screen in the communal viewing area displayed the same feed, a live broadcast from Habitat Block 7, where something unprecedented was unfolding. Elias Corin knelt in the artificial grassland, his weathered hands cradling a bundle of midnight black fur. The creature within stirred, releasing a sound that would have sent most sentient beings fleeing for their lives, a guttural growl that resonated with primordial fear. But Elias didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his grip and continued humming an old Terran lullaby. "Impossible," hissed Rexcall, the station's saurian security chief, his scales rippling with disbelief. "That's a Car-X juvenile. They're apex predators from Theta Draconis IV. Their hunting instinct activates at 3 weeks. That human should be dead," the gathered crowd murmured in agreement. The Car-X were legendary. 8-limbed killing machines with retractable claws that could shear through battle-grade armor and a bite force measured in metric tons. Adult specimens had wiped out entire colonial outposts. To see one so close to a human, especially a defenseless infant, defied all xenobiological understanding. But Elias Corin had never been one for following conventional wisdom. 3 months earlier, a Car-X pride had been decimated by poachers hunting for their luminescent hide patterns. The only survivor was a newborn cub, barely clinging to life when the authorities raided the smuggler's ship. Every xeno-veterinarian on the station had refused to treat it. Too dangerous, they said. Better to terminate it humanely. Elias had been walking past the medical bay when he heard the cub's cries, weak, desperate sounds that transcended species barriers. He'd stopped, peered through the observation window, and seen what others refused to see, not a monster, but a frightened child calling for a parent who would never answer. "I'll take him," he'd said simply. The station administrator, a bureaucratic centaurian named Polthex, had laughed until he realized the human was serious. Forms were filled. Waivers were signed. Everyone assumed they'd be cleaning up Elias's remains within a week. They called the cub Rothar, Little Thunder, in the old human tongue of Proto-Germanic. It seemed fitting for a creature whose purr sounded like distant storms. The early days were brutal. Rothar refused synthetic formula, grew weaker by the hour. Elias researched obsessively, contacting xenobiologists across 3 sectors, studying Car-X physiology until his eyes burned. He discovered that Car-X cubs needed a specific enzyme found only in the regurgitated stomach contents of their mothers, an evolutionary adaptation that ensured family bonds. Most would have given up. Elias synthesized it in the station's medical lab, working through 72 hours without sleep until he'd created a viable substitute. The first time Rothar drank from the bottle Elias offered, the human wept. Now, watching the feed, the station's inhabitants witnessed something that would be studied in xenoanthropology courses for generations. Rothar had grown from a mewling infant to a sleek juvenile, his 8 limbs coordinated, his crystalline eyes sharp with intelligence. He was entering the phase when wild Car-X began learning to hunt, and he was playing. Elias tossed a synthetic ball across the habitat. Rothar's predatory instincts kicked in immediately. He launched himself forward with explosive speed, limbs working in perfect synchronization, claws extending. The crowd gasped. Surely this was the moment. Surely the creature's nature would override whatever strange bond had formed. But instead of continuing past the ball toward Elias, Rothar skidded to a halt, grabbed the toy in his primary mandibles, and loped back to the human. He dropped it at Elias's feet, then did something that made the entire observation deck fall silent. He nuzzled against Elias's chest and began to purr, that deep, thunderous sound that adult Car-X used only with their pride members. "By the void," whispered Dr. Sinara, the station's lead xenobiologist. "He's imprinted, fully imprinted. The human isn't prey or even pack. He's registered as parent." Over the following weeks, the broadcast became the station's most watched programming. Elias taught Rothar to respond to commands, not through dominance but through trust and positive reinforcement. When Rothar became frustrated during training, Elias never punished. He simply sat with the cub, stroking his fur, murmuring reassurances in that peculiar human way. "Humans are insane," became the common refrain. "They'll bond with anything." But those who watched closely saw something deeper. They saw Elias sleeping on the habitat floor when Rothar had nightmares, keeping watch until the cub's breathing steadied. They saw him celebrating every milestone. The first time Rothar retracted his claws on command, the first time he shared his food, the first time he waited patiently instead of demanding. The defining moment came during a station malfunction. A containment breach in the lower decks released toxic fumes into Habitat Block 7. Alarms shrieked. Automated systems initiated lockdown protocols. Elias, overcome by the fumes, collapsed. Security feeds showed Rothar, now nearly full-grown and weighing 300 kilos of pure muscle and predatory evolution, standing over Elias's unconscious form. His natural instincts screamed at him to flee, to save himself from the poison air. Every biological imperative commanded self-preservation. Instead, Rothar grasped Elias's uniform in his mandibles, carefully, so carefully, and dragged the human to the emergency ventilation shaft. He tore through the reinforced grating with strength that shouldn't have existed in a juvenile, creating an opening to breathable air. Then he curled his massive body around Elias, shielding him from further exposure, purring continuously until rescue teams arrived. When Elias woke in medical, Rothar was beside him, one massive paw resting on the human's chest. The cub's eyes, those crystalline orbs that reflected evolutionary millennia of apex predation, held something that transcended instinct. They held love. The station's xenopsychologist, after reviewing the footage, issued a report that would revolutionize interspecies relations theory. What we've witnessed isn't an anomaly. It's a demonstration of what we've always underestimated about humans: their capacity to see kinship where others see only danger, to offer compassion where others offer only fear. Elias Koran didn't tame Rothar. He raised him, and in doing so he's proven that the bonds of family aren't written in DNA. They're written in the daily acts of care, sacrifice, and unconditional acceptance. On the day Rothar reached full maturity, dignitaries from a dozen worlds gathered to witness the dangerous experiment's conclusion. Many expected tragedy. Some hoped for it. Eager to validate their prejudices about both humans and Orcs, instead, they watched as Rothar, now a magnificent specimen of his species standing 2 meters at the shoulder, approached Elias with deliberate steps. The human stood his ground, arms open. Rothar lowered his massive head and touched his forehead to Elias's chest, the Orc's gesture of ultimate trust and familial recognition. Then, through the translator matrix that had been surgically implanted to allow interspecies communication, he spoke his first words in galactic common: Father. The observation deck erupted in chaos, some with joy, others with disbelief. But Elias simply wrapped his arms around his son's neck and whispered something only Rothar could hear. Later, when asked what he'd said, Elias smiled. I told him what I tell him every night: that he's loved, that he's safe, that he'll always have a home. And perhaps that's what made humanity so extraordinary in the galactic community. Not their technology, not their adaptability, not even their stubbornness. It was their refusal to see others as they were supposed to be seen, and their insistence on seeing them as they could be, as family, regardless of species origin or nature. Elias Koran had raised an orphaned predator cub, and in doing so, he'd taught the galaxy a lesson about the greatest human strength of all: the courage to love without condition, and the faith that love could be returned.